One of the things I liked about Raw was that there were 4 or 5 different things going on, different stories playing out with different people all throughout the night, including the first qualifying matches for Money in the Bank, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But the big angle, we got 2 big debuts closing out the shows this week, one on Monday, one on Friday. Let's talk about the one on Monday, which was the arrival of Uncle Howdy and the Wyatt Sicks, which they are spelling like the word sick, with an S at the end of it. Technically, there are 5 members so far: Uncle Howdy, Nikki Cross, Eric Rowan, Dexter Lumis, and Joe Gacy. None of whom were identified by those names, nor were their faces shown, but that's who it was. They were all photographed together after the show at a Whataburger with a fan. Nothing like some burgers after a night of mass murder. You know, there's a very dark Ronald McDonald movie in there somewhere if they ever have the guts to make it. For weeks now, there have been glitches on screen during Raw and SmackDown pay-per-views. There have been QR codes. They tried to replicate the success of the White Rabbit campaign with Bray Wyatt, because when something works once, you go back to it again, and I guess it worked with some people, right? With me, it just got to the point where I was ready for them to get on with it already and just show up. And what I said last week was, they should do a Nexus-style beatdown on half the roster. If you want to make an impact on day one, that's what you do. It's not enough to just show up and attack one person. You need to have them really shake things up. So at the end of Raw, the lights went out, Bray Wyatt's magic door appeared on stage, and out crawled zombie Nikki Cross, dressed like what I would imagine Sister Abigail would look like, right? Abby the Witch, with a Leatherface-esque mask over her face. She pointed the cameraman to the back, and the camera followed with one continuous shot. The entire backstage area was dark, filled with blue light, filled with fog. We had Eric Rowan dressed as Ramblin' Rabbit from the Firefly Funhouse. He had the giant Bludgeon Brothers mallet with the words "Help Me" written on it. Bodies on the ground piled up at his feet. The gorilla position looked like a bomb had gone off. More bodies. Blood spatter on the walls. Dexter Lumis dressed as Mercy the Buzzard, sitting cross-legged on top of some equipment. You know, since Kevin Dunn left and Lee Fitting took over the production, we have gotten more shots of the gorilla position than ever before, it feels like. Like on the week-to-week television, we have seen this gorilla position, and they call it that too. It still feels weird to even keep calling it that. It's such an inside thing, but like they call it that on TV. We've heard them mention that before, and we have gotten more shots of that week to week on television than ever before on WWE programming now for months. Because, you know, they'll often do these continuous shots now where somebody will come through the back, they'll walk through Gorilla and out to the ring. This has me wondering now if that was intentional for another reason, which was to make it more shocking when they showed us this scene here, when it was all blown up, because it was very jarring to see. Whether it was intentional or not, it was very effective. The camera then followed back behind the curtain where we saw Joe Gacy with a gas mask on. I think he was supposed to be Huskus the Pig, I think. More bodies on the ground, including poor Chad Gable, who was sitting propped up against an equipment case with what looked like a gunshot wound on the side of his head. You know, people spent days trying to figure out who all the other bodies on the floor were. I saw people saying Braun Strowman, and there was a guy who was lying on the ground, you know, in Gorilla, who in the darkness kind of sort of maybe looked like Braun, but I don't know that the tattoo matched. It didn't necessarily look like him. Dominic Mysterio was another name I saw thrown out there. Triple H, he was laid out. I would love to know where people saw that. Carmelo Hayes. People mention Carmelo Hayes, which doesn't even make any sense because he's on SmackDown. Every single one of them were wrong because they brought in extras for the scene. Chad Gable was the only one. And then we saw Uncle Howdy, played by Bo Dallas, who literally almost tripped over the bodies, but he played it off nicely. Otherwise, that would have been his Shockmaster moment. He strolled through the carnage, out to the stage with all the other characters. He picked up Bray's old lantern. He said, "We're here," and then he blew it out. So Chad Gable had a very bad night on Monday. He lost his match, he lost the Alpha Academy, and he lost his life, all in the span of 3 hours. Yet for all the people proclaiming him buried, he still had 4 segments on the show, which is a lot of real estate to devote to somebody they're supposedly trying to bury. You know, wrestling fans can be very funny sometimes. I'll get back to Gable in a bit. First off, I thought the presentation here was top-notch. I said it on Monday. I think they hit a home run with this. And I know people are big into ranking these things because I'm already getting questions like that. Where does this rank in all-time debuts? We need to calm down here. Okay, this was not even the best debut this week. It was well done. It was very well done. As group debuts go, it was not as good as the Nexus debut. I remember watching that live when they went after the announcers. And Justin Roberts got choked out with his own tie, and pulling up the mats in the ring and overturning the announce desk. Things that we have seen a million times since then, but back then we hadn't seen that. And destroying, 2 of the top stars on the roster in John Cena and CM Punk. So no, this was not that. And honestly, had they worked this angle the same way, a little more realistically, maybe around the ring, without all the implied murder, it could have worked just as well with the characters, appearing one by one at ringside from out of nowhere, maybe from the crowd or from under the ring. But then ultimately, Uncle Howdy does his little dance, out to the ring, down the aisle, and surveys all the carnage, and they all stand in the middle of the ring together. They blow out the lantern, cut to black. It would have worked fine that way too. But this fits with the spooky presentation of the Fiend character. That's what they were going for here. They're looking to continue what Bray Wyatt started. And to that end, if Bray were alive and could see that segment on Monday and see his brother out there doing his thing, I have no doubt that he would have a big smile on his face. This was actually darker and more violent than anything they ever let Bray do. But I liked how all the violence happened off camera. And we never actually saw someone get bludgeoned to death on screen. Now, when it comes to stuff like that, you really have to stretch the bounds of your suspension of disbelief. Wrestling is all about suspension of disbelief, but then you get a character or you get an angle like this that really pushes the boundaries of what that means. Some people are going to hate this, and they're going to laugh at the absurdity of this, or not even laugh. They're going to be angry about it and how it makes a mockery of pro wrestling. There's been a lot of divided opinion, mostly positive, but there has been a mix of good and bad opinion this week about this. We are supposed to believe that these men massacred all of these people. And this week, the show will simply go on. On Friday, the show simply went on. But at least they had acknowledged it and beefed up security on SmackDown. Now, in my head, I can rationalize what I saw very simply. I can rationalize what I saw by saying that these people were knocked unconscious. Maybe they were all knocked out by some kind of gas, after they were beaten up, and you again get blood spatter on the walls. But maybe they were knocked out by some kind of gas or chemical that was released backstage. That's why we saw all the smoke, right? Hence why the Wyatts were all wearing masks. I mean, hell, Joe Gacy was literally wearing a gas mask. All right, so I can believe that. I can formulate that in my head and say, okay, I can believe that. And as for these characters, it's the same way I felt about the Fiend. We were witnessing the delusions of a man having a psychotic break. These people are misfits cut from the same cloth, which is why they dress and they act the way that they do. So to make it more grounded in reality, that's how I would explain it. That's how I would rationalize it. I did burst out laughing, though, when I read the Sami Zayn quote. He was interviewed this week, and he talked about how he had left the building on Monday like 10 minutes before the show ended. He said he had no idea what had happened. He didn't check the results or anything like that. He got to his hotel room, and he tweeted out a pre-sale code for his comedy show that is coming up in Toronto, Money in the Bank weekend. And he sees all of the replies from fans under his tweet saying, "Your coworkers have been killed. What are you doing tweeting about the comedy show?" That's just... I just burst out laughing just reading that. It's so fucking ridiculous. But it's true. It's true. Chad Gable, the man he just spent months feuding with. At one point, he was mentoring Sami going into his match at WrestleMania. Then they were feuding for months. Is seemingly killed. He murdered at the end of the show. And Sami Zayn, the first thing he does after the show is tweet out a link to a pre-sale for his comedy show. It's just all so ridiculous. Wrestling and horror does not always mix well, and I'm a fan of both. I've been a fan of wrestling my whole life, and I love horror. I love horror movies, okay? They don't always mix well. If you were watching the latest Texas Chainsaw Massacre film of the 48 that they've made, and it suddenly, in the middle of the movie, it suddenly broke out into a pro wrestling show, especially if you're not a wrestling fan, you probably wouldn't like that very much. So I understand the hate that some people had for this. They do it, though, because it appeals to enough of their audience that they feel like they can make money off of it. Do you know how much money they made off of Fiend merchandise? Do you know how much money Alexa Bliss and the company made off those fucking Lily dolls? They were still selling them in Tampa when I was at the Royal Rumble. And when was the last time we even saw Alexa Bliss on television? It has a broad appeal, especially to kids. Now, I don't know how much killing people is going to have, appeal to little kids, but there's a reason they're going back to this stuff again, and it's not just to pay tribute to Bray Wyatt, or because they feel sorry for Bo Dallas and they're doing him some kind of favor. He could come out and pay tribute to his brother by wearing an armband if he wanted to, okay? They're doing it because they think it will bring more eyeballs to the show, and they can sell a shit ton of toys. They can promote an entire Wyatt Sicks Deluxe Edition when 2K25 comes out. Imagine what you can do with those characters in a video game setting. Look at the social media numbers that segment did this week. Over 25 million views in the first 24 hours. The challenge is going to be handling it as a special attraction going forward. This is not the sort of thing they can do on television every single week. This is something that needs to be as grounded in reality as possible going forward, or else it's going to burn itself out. This type of gimmick has a short shelf life unless it evolves into something else. Week 1, they made an impact. Great. Now what? What does week 2 look like? What does that first promo look like where we get to hear from Uncle Howdy? What does their first match look like? Because it is a wrestling show after all. These are pro wrestlers. They are going to have to wrestle. Eventually, the lights will be brought back up, the smoke will be gone, the music will stop, the bell will ring, and then we will find out whether the Wyatt Sicks is going to be a flash in the pan or something that can be sustained over a long period of time. And maybe something that even makes a couple of new stars out of it. Bo Dallas has gone through several gimmicks in his career, never got over at a high level. The closest thing was the delusional Bo Leave stuff he started doing in NXT, which was great, but it never translated the same way to the main roster. The Social Outcast, the B Team, that was mid-card level stuff. Now he's got his own group of rejects to lead. Now he's a leader. And this matters more than anything else that he has ever done because he's carrying on the vision that his brother left behind. If there was ever going to be a time for him to get over as a top-tier player in this company, this is it. This is his chance. Nikki Cross hasn't been interesting since she was doing the crazy Nikki stuff in the Sanity days. And that goes all the way back to NXT. Don't even get me started on the almost a superhero stuff. Dexter Lumis is the perfect name for this type of gimmick. Going around killing people, considering where his name comes from. Dexter from the TV show about an actual serial killer. And Loomis from Dr. Sam Loomis from the Halloween films. But they never did much with him on the main roster, and then he just vanished. The man can work. So can Joe Gacy, who's he's setting up now his first shot on the main roster. Eric Rowan has had a couple of different stints on the main roster. He was a Wyatt family member. He was a Bludgeon brother. He walked around with a giant pet spider in a cage. I like Eric Rowan. I'm glad he's employed somewhere, and I hope things work out for him. I was actually surprised he didn't get picked up by Tony Khan after Revolution 2 years ago when he had that great showing in the trios match. It was him and Death Triangle against the House of Black. They're calling the Wyatt Sicks, calling them the Wyatt Sicks, but it's a play on the number 6. Maybe Alexa Bliss will join them at some point. I still would be surprised if they don't work her into this in some way. Apparently, from what I've read, one of the QR codes had a code on it, UEDNJ51A, and people think that each letter I don't know what the 51 would stand for, but people think that each letter corresponds to each member of the group. So U for Uncle Howdy, E for Eric Rowan, D for Dexter. I feel like I'm on fucking Sesame Street here. D for Dexter Loomis, N for Nikki Cross, J for Joe Gacy, and the A is for Alexa Bliss. I don't know. I think the sixth member is Bray Wyatt, since he'll be forever linked to this, but we'll see. I also don't know who they're going to feud with, if they're going to target just one person initially or branch out and target multiple people. They targeted multiple people on Monday. Yeah, I mean, why stop only at one? What is their motivation here? You know, are they motivated by championships and power? Are they motivated by revenge? If so, why? Revenge for what? They talked about salvation. You ignored us. You were warned. What does it all mean? I don't know. But I hope whoever they work with, we don't have a repeat of the Fiend and the Seth Rollins stuff, which, I mean, even Seth admitted it was hard to work with him, you know, in that gear and in that character. It was a hard thing to navigate. If you're a babyface working against these characters, it's very easy to be dragged down into the muck. They have to make sure they don't kill off every babyface that they work with. Seth Rollins eventually rebounded from it. LA Knight was charismatic enough to come out of it and go on to eventually become a bigger star, but not everybody can talk themselves into a push the way that LA Knight did, you know, coming out of that Bray Wyatt feud. Fightful is reporting that, quote, even though the group is not likely to interact with every program on Raw, it is expected within the company that the ramifications will be widespread across various programs with a domino effect on stories that are happening up and down the show. Those we spoke to said that the wide array of talent and people attacked in the story and the characters who, quote unquote, left before the show were calculated, planned, and designed for specific reasons. That would include Sami Zayn, who said he left before the show ended. Braun Strowman, who has his own ties to the Wyatt family, right? Even feuded with Bray. Remember the swamp fight? He said he left early too when he chased the Judgment Day out of the building during the main event between Jey Uso, Finn Balor, and Rey Mysterio. Strowman having some sort of tie into all this would also make sense. The idea of the people who were attacked, namely Chad Gable, that was calculated for a specific reason, that has me thinking that maybe Gable can use that as a way to guilt the Alpha Academy back into standing with him again after they walked out on him on Monday. They finally got fed up with his shit. Had they stayed, maybe Gable wouldn't have been attacked. And so maybe they apologized to him for not being there and, you know, they kind of get back in his good graces, but it's too little too late. Maybe we get an even nastier side of Gable now, who finds himself a new family with the Creed brothers and Ivy Nile, and they destroy Otis and Tozawa and Maxine, and that's how we end up with Gable and the Creeds. If they can find a way for the Wyatt Sicks to cause all kinds of chaos that way, where they also influence these other stories that are playing out right now on the Raw roster, I think that could be great. It's all a matter of how they play it. But if they find a way to thread these stories together, that could be very interesting. But Raw tomorrow night cannot just be business as usual. How they address last week's massacre is the biggest question heading into tomorrow night. The show is also in Indianapolis, which just so happens to be where Pat McAfee films his show. And there were some weird things going on this week with glitches and lights going out in studio. If the Wyatts take out Pat McAfee for a few weeks, they'll be automatic baby faces, because he's been getting on my nerves the past few weeks.